Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. Sir Alex Ferguson is widely accepted as one of the greatest managers of all time. He built several great teams, and one team of note was the United side between 2006 and 2009. Spearheading this team was one of the finest trios the league had ever seen, in Rooney, Tevez and Ronaldo. But what was it that made their triumvirate so successful, tactically, statistically and beyond? Well, in this video we take a look. But just before we get into that, if you want to keep up with your favorite teams and clubs, check out our video sponsor, OneFootball. You can get matchday updates and statistics, as well as football news, general stats and much more. It's free and you can get it through the link in the description. So how was this triumphant three assembled? And how good were they before the three became official in 07-08? Well, the first to join the club was none other than Cristiano Ronaldo. The club had already been scouting a young Ronaldo, who had caught the eye of several top European clubs with his eye-catching dribbling, and they had planned to sign him in the 2004-2005 season. However, after impressing in a club friendly, United moved quickly and secured him for £12 million, making him the most expensive teenager in English football. Leading into the 06-07 season, Ronaldo had been involved in some light controversy, as it was perceived he had contributed to the sending off of Rooney as Portugal faced England in the World Cup. And as a result, he was booed at almost every stadium throughout the season. However, that was still his breakthrough season, and playing mainly off the right, he scored 17 and contributed 15 assists in the league. Ronaldo was quickly joined by Wayne Rooney, who had already been impressing for a couple of seasons with Everton. United used their power in the transfer market to lure Rooney, who turned down a £50,000 a week contract from the club and submitted a transfer request instead. United were again willing to pay big, now making him the most expensive teenager in the country with a successful £25 million bid. Leading up to the 06-07 season, Rooney had already been putting in consistent performances and was a key figure in the squad, although still viewed as a short-tempered youngster. In fact, in 2006-2007, he contributed 14 league goals and 11 assists for the team. And finally, we have Carlos Tevez. Tevez had moved to West Ham under controversial circumstances regarding third-party involvement. Despite that, he was keen helping the club avoid relegation. His 7 goals were the second most for the club, and many came in key moments, such as the final day match against his future club to avoid relegation. Add to that his club-high 3 assists, and it meant he was named Hammer of the Year. But West Ham were under heavy investigation for the nature of the transfer, so in the meantime they approved a 2-year loan deal where United paid them $5 million each season. But before the fabled three became official, Ferguson had led them to the league title in 06-07 with a classic team that looked like this. But crucially, they had missed out in Europe, going deep into the semi-final before falling to eventual champions AC Milan. Ferguson wanted United to return to the pinnacle of the game and went big in the transfer market ahead of the 07-08 season, bringing in Hargreaves, Anderson, Nani and finally Tevez. But how would they all fit in tactically? Well, there were many questions, as fans recognized that Tevez coming in meant Zaha would drop down to the bench. However, this would mean they wouldn't have an out-and-out forward. This is because in the previous season they had used a rough 4-4-2 formation. Giggs still started regularly out on the left, meaning Ronaldo spent the majority of his time on the right, and although he had defensive freedom, he was still considered a winger. In the prior season, Rooney was one of the forwards, but in a 2 alongside Zaha. And in the majority of games, he played in a withdrawn, more creative role, doing the majority of the running looking for spaces both to create and score, far from being a traditional forward. And Tevez had so far played a similar role throughout his career, playing off the back of Zamora in 06-07 as a second striker, depending on the bigger man to occupy the centre-backs. So how would United get the necessary goals from a winger and 2 second strikers? Well, Ferguson shifted his tactics. The back 5 remained the same, but in the midfield, that 4-4-2 gave way to a lopsided 4-3-3. Carrick and Scholes were both key to the system, and would often be joined by Hargreaves when fit to create a 3. Alternatively, Giggs was beginning to adjust his game, now comfortable starting infield as the most advanced of a midfield 3, meaning they could shift to a 4-2-3-1 during the game. At the same time, if they needed more industry, Ji-sung Park could play wide on the right with Rooney or Tevez filling in the opposing flank out of possession. But that left the front three, who especially when playing against weaker opposition, were given almost complete freedom. And the key to this was that all three of them were comfortable playing any of the front three positions. Ronaldo was the winger, but Tevez and Rooney would often be found out wide, with Ronaldo himself moving up front. And Ronaldo could just as easily move to either flank and cross for the others himself. They were given the freedom to express their attacking creativity. Ferguson had made the perceived weakness of no dedicated striker into one of their deadliest weapons. When in controlled passages of play, in Scholes and Carrick, United had two exceptional midfielders on the ball, who were comfortable recycling the ball to allow the team to move upfield. With Ronaldo not being a stationary left winger, space was freely available on the left, and Evra, as a highly attacking fullback, was constantly advancing, whilst Brown was more conservative. The front three could adapt depending on the opposition, able to spread wide in order to stretch the opposition, or they could look to overload the centre, drawing the opposition in central, where they could then go wide and look to cross to the crowded centre. Their setup could alter as one of the two could come deep to receive the ball, whilst the others pinned the centre-backs back, or look to draw them forward instead, opening up space for the run-in behind. But far more than the pre-match tactics causing most damage, the understanding of the three was the major weapon, with each of them comfortable both scoring and assisting. Opposition defenders weren't allowed to identify the man they were marking throughout the match, tracking them only to realize that a new threat had emerged where they just were. Ronaldo was usually the trigger point for the movement of his partners, famously spending the first few minutes probing for any weakness in the defense, whether it was a slow centre-back or a defensively suspect fullback such as Essien in the Champions League final. At the same time, if the defense were particularly vulnerable on the ball themselves, they had two engines who could press and harry them all game to win the ball back quickly. But this team was built on flexibility. Against bigger teams, they altered their tactics, often with Park starting and the formation usually in a 4-5-1 or a 4-2-3-1. And as Rooney said, we had the team built to hit teams on the break, and we were devastating at it. They would often sit deep against stronger opposition, especially in Europe, and although all three were capable of defending, United were keen on maximising Ronaldo's pace whilst using Rooney and Tevez's natural work rate. As Rooney said again, we had a good compromise because me and Tevez would do a lot more work defensively than Cristiano. From the deep positions, United had the perfect spring in Scholes, maximising his long-range passing to break their team forward. As soon as Ronaldo got the ball, Tevez and Rooney were rapid enough to join the attack, and fluid counter-attacking goals were a common sight, one in particular against Arsenal being a perfect example. All three were big game players, and en route to the Champions League that season, the goals in the knockout stages came from Tevez, Ronaldo, Rooney, Scholes, and Ronaldo. But it wasn't just the quantity of goals, it was the synergy of them that cemented the three. Ronaldo topped their league goals with 31, followed by Tevez on 18 and Rooney on 15. Rooney had the most assists with 13, followed by Tevez and Ronaldo both on 9. Of his 9 assists, Ronaldo directly assisted Rooney 3 times and the same for Tevez. Rooney provided 2 assists to each of his colleagues and Tevez did the same. Ronaldo was involved in half the team's league goal and won the Ballon d'Or as a result, with Rooney contributing 35% and Tevez 34%. The season culminated in the Premier League, Champions League, and early the following season, a Club World Cup. United and their front three ruled Europe and the world. It was a glorious era, but a short-lived one, as the very next season marked the beginning of the end for the three. Dimitar Berbatov came in the following season in a big money transfer. As such, he commanded a place in the starting 11 and didn't have the same mobility as Tevez. As a result, he mainly operated in the central role, meaning Ronaldo was now moved primarily to the left wing. Tevez saw himself going from having the joint most starts of the three to almost half the amount, and only contributed 8 goals overall in the league. Now back on the wing and with less freedom, Ronaldo also saw his goals drop, meaning the team's overall goals for dropped as well. But the team was still successful, again winning the league, the Community Shield, the League Cup, and being runners-up in the Champions League final. The following season, despite the fans' protests, the Tevez transfer was not made permanent, and instead he moved to crosstown rivals Manchester City. It marked the end of an incredible frontline, who had shone brightly and for a moment in time illuminated the entire footballing world. But where do you think they rank amongst trios all time? And what are your general thoughts on the front three? Let me know in the comments below. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.